Okay, let's unpack this. We just witnessed one of the most stunning, and if you really know the history of this league, one of the most painfully predictable endings to a championship run in League of Legends history.
It really is. It's the highest of highs, followed by just the sharpest drop into the cold, hard business reality of esports.
Absolutely. We were talking about Gumezi, a three-time champion AD carry, the 2024 World Championship FMVP, the finals most valuable player, and he's not being retained by T1.
Not at all. The ink is barely dry on the trophy engraving, and he's already out the door.
It's just, I mean, fans are completely bewildered.
Of course they are, because they see the glory, right? They see the clutch plays. They see him helping T1 complete the Triple Crown winning Worlds, MSI, and a domestic title all in the same year.
Which is an incredible achievement.
Historic achievement. They see 6 total titles with the organization, all of them alongside Faker. And yet this player is suddenly, too expensive? Or maybe, and this is the scary part, too replaceable.
It just seems like a fundamental contradiction. How can the most valuable player in the most important game of the year, someone who represents the whole T1 legacy, suddenly become unwanted?
And that, right there, is precisely the focus of this deep dive. We are shifting the spotlight away from the champions on the stage and onto the accountants in the back rooms. We are examining what some people call the FMVP curse. But it's not really a curse driven by fate. It's driven by economics.
Right. So our mission here is to look chronologically at the history of these finals MVPs, from the very first winner all the way to Guma, to understand why so many of them struggle.
Exactly. Why do they struggle to find stability or even just adequate pay right after hitting what should be their absolute career peak?
We're going to drill down on the critical roles of money, contract duration, a club's financial strategy, and the increasingly disruptive power of player agencies.
The narrative they sell you is often about immortal glory, but our sources reveal that the reality is frequently about razor-sharp business decisions, strict institutional philosophies, and just intense salary cap constraints.
So where do we start?
Let's start at the very beginning of this whole saga. 2014, with the first non-Faker FMVP story.
This is a truly foundational moment in esports contract history, isn't it? And it starts with an event that had absolutely nothing to do with League of Legends.
Nothing at all. It was a major corporate profit drop.
So let's talk about Mata in 2014.
Mata was and is a legend. He was the first, and he's still the only support player in World Championship history to win the FMVP award.
That's an amazing stat.
It is. He led his Samsung White team to a globally dominant victory. I mean, they looked utterly unstoppable.
Yet, immediately after that victory, the whole organization was facing just complete internal upheaval.
Can you elaborate on the corporate crisis that triggered this? I mean, the whole roster disbanded. Absolutely. And this is the crucial context you have to understand. The Samsung organization, the global conglomerate, was facing catastrophic financial strain.
And this wasn't from their esports division?
No, not at all. It was from their primary divisions. The sources specifically highlight a massive drop in profit from their mobile division in late 2014. So a non-esports catastrophe instantly dictated the fate of the best esports team in the world.
Wow.
This corporate financial strain triggered an immediate, drastic need to cut costs across the board.
So the world's best team, which had just secured the biggest trophy in the game, instantly became an expensive liability.
An expensive liability because of corporate failures entirely outside their control. The champions were disposable.
That's brutal.
It's the reality of it.
Yeah.
Samsung immediately sought to drastically cut the esports player salaries, and internally they were already talking about exiting the scene entirely.
A move they eventually delayed for 3 years, right?
They did. But in the short term, they needed to retain these players as cheaply as possible. To maximize their brand capital from the win without spending market rate salaries on the players who actually earned it.
And this is where it gets really ugly. This leads to the legendary, almost unbelievable level of corporate deceit. The no one wants your lie.
It's just jaw-dropping audacity. Samsung allegedly tried to retain these world-class, globally dominant players on the cheap by telling the entire championship squad that, incredibly, no other organization in the world had any interest in signing them.
Wait. They told the reigning world champions they had zero market value.
That's what the sources claim. It was clearly an attempt to scare them into taking massive pay cuts and just staying put out of fear.
How could they possibly think that would work? I mean, especially when the LPL at the time was famous for throwing huge money at Korean stars.
Well, they underestimated the players' connections and their intelligence. Thankfully, the deception didn't last long.
Okay, so what happened?
Daddy, another member of that winning squad, quickly figured out this was completely false. He was probably getting calls from friends in other regions, and he warned his teammates. He famously told them to run and not to believe the club's fabricated story.
So that one warning just blew the whole thing up.
It immediately led to the dispersal of that legendary roster. All that talent just scattered across the globe.
And Mata himself, he chose to join the LPL, moving to Vici Gaming. But his move wasn't just about the money, which I find fascinating. He really tried to prioritize team synergy.
It really speaks volumes about his desire to win, not just, cash a check. When Mata chose VG, he reportedly demanded that VG also sign his jungle partner, Dandy.
That makes perfect sense.
It was a strategic move to ensure their key synergy, the thing that was so critical to Samsung White's success, remained intact. And what's more, he insisted they hire a Korean coach.
So he knew he needed a familiar support system in a new cultural environment like the LPL.
Exactly. He tried to import the structure along with the talent. But even with all those precautions, his time at VG was, well, it was unsuccessful.
The results were poor, right? It just confirms how hard it is to replicate success across different regions.
It really was. His time at VG was ultimately a failure, and the sources say it was primarily because the other laners struggled significantly to adapt or perform at that level.
So there was growing frustration internally.
A lot of it. The source material paints a picture where Mata and Dandy were reportedly so dismayed by the lack of a competitive structure that Mata actually began to slack off toward the end of his one-year tenure there.
That detail is just tragic. A player so focused on competitive integrity that when the environment fails to meet his standards, he just loses motivation.
Absolutely. He eventually left VG after just 1 year, returned to the LCK, and joined giants like KT and then SKT, but the lesson here is foundational.
Yeah.
Even the greatest players, the very first FMVPs, can be undone not by competitive failure, but by corporate instability and outright deceit. Mata never won Worlds again as a player.
Though, as a little footnote, he did complete the full circle story, right?
He did. He won the 2024 title as a coach for Weibo Gaming.
What a fascinating career arc. Okay, now let's move on to 2015 and SKT's first major challenge in managing post-championship FMVP salary demands. This is where they established that famous T1 salary ceiling precedent. We're talking about Marine.
Marine was an extraordinary talent. He was so highly anticipated. People are even dubbing him the faker of the top lane.
That's a massive compliment, but also a huge amount of pressure on a player.
For sure. He struggled a bit first, but his 2015 season was his absolute career peak. The sources note he set a record that's still unbroken today, 31 solo kills in the summer split.
31. That is a staggering metric of dominance in his lane.
It really is. So after securing the world's title and the FMVP, he came to the negotiating table with T1, and his request was bold, but it reflected his performance.
What did he ask for?
It was extremely ambitious, and you could argue completely justified by that FMVP performance. Marine asked for a salary that would be second only to fakers within the organization.
So he was essentially demanding to be recognized as the clear number 2 star on the team, a true co-star to the unkillable Demon King.
Exactly. And T1's reaction was, as you said earlier, ruthless and financially pragmatic. This decision really sets the tone for every single T1 negotiation that follows, right up to Gumayusi today.
Completely ruthless.
They rejected the request, and they did so based on 2 specific financial rationales, which, by the way, they still hold to this day.
Okay, what were they?
First, they cited Marine's age. He was 24 years old at the time. In the hyper-competitive LCK, 24 was already considered pretty old for a player who was just hitting their peak and looking for a multi-year max-level contract.
So T1 just didn't view it as a wise long-term financial investment. They were calculating the depreciation risk.
Precisely. And the second reason is pure organizational preservation, managing the salary cap.
Right, I was going to say.
SKT was profoundly concerned about setting a precedent that could just fracture their entire salary structure. If they paid Marine a salary that was even close to fakers, they feared it would trigger salary chaos.
Because every other teammate, having just won Worlds, would immediately come knocking, demanding comparable high salaries.
Exactly. SKT has always prioritized organizational stability and cost control over retaining every single champion. They know they can cultivate new talent cheaply.
So Marin immediately looked elsewhere, and the LPL, which was in its high spending phase, offered a number that T1 simply refused to match.
The LPL answered with what the sources described as an epic offer. LGD offered Marin a 2-year contract reportedly worth 2.8 billion Korean won.
Can you contextualize that figure for us? That sounds like a massive number.
It was. To put that in perspective for you, that was roughly 2.4 million US dollars at the time, or about 13.6 million RMB. For a 24-year-old player, that kind of money was irresistible. He signed with LGD.
He secured the epic contract, but the sources detail that he had to endure epic care. That phrasing just sums up the culture clash perfectly.
It's a brilliant encapsulation of the downside of that LPL gold rush at the time. Marin struggled significantly with the LGD environment. He just didn't find the competitive structure he was used to in the LCK.
What was the issue?
He noted that the management often enjoyed drinking and socializing, and the other players were generally focused more on just playing the game rather than the intense, disciplined training regimen he expected.
It sounds like he traded the competitive atmosphere for the paycheck. He realized too late that money doesn't buy structure.
He really did. He revealed that during breaks, he was often the only one in the entire team house actually training while his teammates were just elsewhere.
And the results suffered dramatically.
They did. It reflected the lack of cohesive effort. Marin only lasted 1 year at LGD, even with that massive contract. And while he did return to the LCK afterward, that single year in the LPL essentially marked the end of his peak career. It really demonstrates that sometimes the financial high road leads to a competitive dead end.
And the narrative of this FMVP curse really cannot proceed without highlighting the one true exception. The player who defines T1's entire organizational philosophy. Let's contrast Marin's fate with what happened with Faker's 2016 renewal, right after he won his second FMVP.
Faker is the structural pillar of T1. He's the asset that transcends performance metrics. After losing Marin, SKT Justar, they quickly replaced him, won Worlds again in 2016, and this time the FMVP went to Faker.
And crucially, SKT's official statement about Faker's renewal was a direct philosophical reversal of the policy they applied to Marin just 1 year before.
It was such a clear line drawn in the sand. They stated publicly, and I'm quoting here, the best player should receive the best treatment, confirming they offered the absolute best possible conditions for his renewal.
And the numbers were huge.
The rumored salary was 3 billion KRW, but Korean esports insiders immediately suggested the actual figure was significantly higher, maybe even double that. It was a figure that reflected not just his performance, but his brand value, his tenure, and his sheer marketability to sponsors.
So this analysis, looking at these two cases side by side, it just confirms the key organizational precedent set by T1 SKT. There's only one truly irreplaceable asset. The one who brings in the sponsorships, the global goodwill, the historical prestige.
Exactly. Faker is non-negotiable. Everyone else, Marin, the FMVP top laner, subsequent FMVPs that we're about to discuss, or Gumayuzi today, is considered negotiable or replaceable.
T1 will pay Faker whatever it takes.
Whatever it takes. But they will not risk upsetting the entire salary structure for anyone else, regardless of how many titles that player wins. And that philosophy, established way back in 2015, is the invisible hand guiding every single T1 contract negotiation since.
All right, so moving on from the LCK's early lessons on institutional philosophy, let's jump to the LPL's mid-era. This is where we see a different kind of financial chaos. The catastrophic risk of signing long-term contracts immediately after a player's peak.
This brings us to 2018 and the case of Ning. This is where we see a high-risk gamble just backfire spectacularly.
Ning was the FMVP for Invictus Gaming. He secured the LPL's first ever world championship, a huge historic moment for the region.
It was massive, and he was arguably the best jungler in the world at that moment. He had made the first team All-Pro in both the spring and summer splits that year. He was on top of the world.
So IG moved quickly. They wanted to lock down their superstar.
They did. They signed Ning and his support partner Balon to an extremely expensive 3-year contract almost immediately after the World's win. IG paid a massive premium for a player who was undeniably at his absolute competitive apex.
A move made purely on emotion and the assumption of sustained dominance.
Completely. And in hindsight, the sources describe this as perhaps the most financially devastating renewal decision in LPL history, specifically because of the duration of that contract.
It was a monumental disaster.
It was. The central problem was that Ning's peak performance was incredibly short-lived. I mean, his decline began rapidly after MSI 2019. That's just 6 months after signing that huge deal.
So within a year of securing that expensive 3-year contract, he was already being rotated or benched.
Yeah, due to inconsistent performance. And remember, IG had high-price renewals for multiple champions at that time. Ning, Baolan, Rookie, and Jackie Love. The sources are very clear that the financial strain was just immense.
Especially because of the long, expensive contracts given to Ning and Baolan.
This strain created a salary cap nightmare for them. The financial commitment to players whose performance had dropped created a severe budget crunch. And the consequence of this financial miscalculation was swift, and it was crippling to their dynasty.
It directly led to the departure of Jackie Love.
Directly. IG became unable to meet Jackie Love's renewal demands. And you have to remember, JKL was one of the most talented and sought-after AD carries in the world at that time.
And reports even suggested he was willing to take a pay cut to stay.
Allegedly, yes. He was willing to take a pay cut to stay with the winning team, but IG simply couldn't afford him because so much of their cap space was irrevocably tied up in those expensive long-term deals, especially Ning's non-performing contract.
So Ning's long, expensive contract didn't just drain IG's resources, it directly caused the departure of another championship starter.
And that departure effectively signaled the rapid decline of the entire IG dynasty.
And there's one more staggering financial detail that makes this a textbook warning.
There is. Ning's contract was so long and his performance trajectory so poor that he eventually left the scene in 2020. He took a break in 2021 without ever even completing the contract. And because his value had just cratered, IG received zero transfer fee on what was initially a massive high-cost investment.
Wow. So they paid millions for 3 years, got minimal high-level performance in return, and recovered none of the money.
That contract essentially crippled the team's financial ability to move forward.
What a dramatic lesson. Signing a long contract at a player's absolute peak is perhaps the biggest financial risk a team can take.
Now let's pivot to the absolute flip side of that coin just 1 year later. We've got Tien in 2019, who was FPX's FMVP. His situation provides such a stark contrast in corporate financial foresight.
Right. Tien wasn't an established star when he joined FPX. He was almost an afterthought in the transaction, wasn't he?
Not at all a star. He joined FPX at the end of 2018 almost as a byproduct related to a much larger transfer deal involving the mid laner Knight. He was not highly valued initially.
I think he only played a handful of games in his first split.
That's right. He only played 12 games in his first spring split. He was essentially fighting for his starting spot and for his career security.
And this low initial value profoundly affected his contract negotiation for the club's massive benefit.
Oh, massively. He was desperate for a chance to play and prove himself on the big stage, so Tien accepted a low-priced 3-year contract. And crucially, he made no specific salary demands. His only demand was the opportunity to play.
It was a classic prove-it contract, just a long one.
Exactly. And FPX won the lottery.
They absolutely secured an astronomical return on their investment.
Tien helped FPX win the World Championship in his very first year with them. And because that low-priced 3-year contract was still locked in, FPX retained an FMVP for a minimal initial cost for the next 2 years.
So, unlike IG, which was bleeding money to retain an underperforming Ning,
Right.
FPX had an FMVP performing world-class services at a bargain rate. They completely avoided the market inflation chaos.
That's the beauty of the timing. Any subsequent pay raise would be an internal negotiation entirely at the club's discretion, not dictated by the inflated free agent market value of a newly minted FMVP.
So he saw out the whole contract.
He did. Tien fulfilled the entire 3-year contract, providing 3 years of world-class service for low initial cost.
So the lesson here for organizations is crystal clear. Success is great, but peak financial stability comes from having an FMVP on a pre-existing low-cost contract, not signing one right after the title is secured.
Precisely. And it's interesting, Tien did eventually leave FPX after the Iceland incident in 2021, which involved some internal team controversy, and he left without receiving a substantial renewal offer.
So even after all that, FPX still weren't willing to pay the massive market rate for a post-peak star.
Nope. But financially, FPX made a genius move compared to IG's catastrophe.
We're jumping ahead now to the early 2020s, an era where the post-FMVP journey involved just unprecedented legal drama and rapid career volatility. This is where we see player agencies become a major, aggressive, disruptive force in negotiations.
We have to talk about Scout in 2021 first. This story is an incredible lesson in contract law and esports. It turned Scout into what you could call the most costly FMVP in history.
How so?
She earned the title, but he ended up paying a fortune.
Right. Scout from EDG. He secured the FMVP title when they won Worlds in 2021. I do remember there was some controversy that year over the criteria, that it focused very heavily on the finals match performance rather than the whole tournament.
There was, but the title was his. And the conflict ignited immediately after the win. Scout wanted to return to the LCK. His rationale was based on what he believed was an existing verbal agreement with EDG.
What was the agreement?
That they would negotiate his release if he ever wanted to return home.
And the core issue here is that a verbal agreement is not a signed contract, especially when there are millions of dollars on the line.
Exactly. That verbal agreement was contingent on EDG consenting to the release. And EDG, having just won the World Championship, riding that massive brand wave, desperately wanted to retain their star roster. They wanted to maintain stability.
So they refused the release.
They did.
Yeah.
Under intense pressure from the league and their sponsors, they refused, intending to hold him to his existing commitment.
But Scout and his agency, they tried to force the issue.
They did. Scout went ahead and signed a contract with KT in the LCK without EDG's permission. He was acting on the belief that his verbal understanding, or just his desire to go home, superseded the formal contract.
So to fix this massive public situation, EDG had to act fast.
Very fast. They retained Scout by offering him an almost double salary immediately. This was a massive, desperate financial outlay just to keep their star player in the LPL and mitigate a breach of contract.
So EDG took a huge financial hit to retain him. What protections did they put in place to ensure they didn't lose him or that massive investment the next year?
This is where it gets really interesting legally. They immediately installed two critical legal protections into the new hyper-expensive contract. First, a 1+1 priority renewal clause.
Okay, what does that mean?
It's crucial. It meant that EDG had the right to match any salary offers from other clubs the following year. It essentially gave them first refusal. And second, and this is equally important, they retained control of his economic rights via his agency contract.
Let's break that down for the listener. What does retaining economic rights mean in this context?
It means that even if Scout were to technically become a free agent, EDG still controlled the business side of his career, his endorsements, his commercial appearances, and ultimately the ability to profit from his labor.
So these two clauses, the priority match and the economic rights, ensured EDG held substantial control over his future.
They effectively locked down their multi-million-dollar investment.
Yet even these ironclad contracts didn't stop the drama in 2022. The agency tried to move him again.
The whole thing blew up the next year during the off-season. Scout's agency tried to negotiate a move again. They deliberately delayed renewal negotiations with EDG.
Which created a huge financial bind for EDG.
A huge one. They couldn't risk committing the new multi-million-dollar salary without a signed renewal. This meant they owed him his salary for a significant period where he wasn't officially signed for the upcoming season.
And then the agency pulled the move that directly triggered the lawsuit.
Yes. They executed what the sources call a divine move, unilaterally moving Scout to LNG, bypassing the 1+1 matching clause, and completely ignoring EDG's retained economic rights. EDG immediately sued, arguing breach of contract.
The judgment was staggering. It must have set a massive legal precedent for player contracts across the whole league.
It was definitive. The court ruled decisively in EDG's favor. They upheld the validity of the 1+1 clause and the retained economic rights. The outcome forced Scout to pay a massive compensation sum of over 30 million RMB.
30 million. To give you some scale, that fine due to the contract dispute and breach was larger than most annual salaries for the highest paid players at the time.
It was career-defining money. And that's what makes the Scout case so unique. Most FMVPs are trying to maximize their earnings, but Scout, because of the complexity and eventual breach of the agreement, was forced to pay. It was a clear signal that player agencies have to adhere to these complex contractual clauses, no matter how badly the player wants to change teams.
Wow. Okay, so now let's move to Kingen in 2022. This case seems to be defined less by contract law and more by agency marketing leverage and the short shelf life of peak performance.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Kingen from DRX. He secured his FMVP after an incredible clutch performance in the S12 finals. I remember his Aatrox was it was insane. He got the Aatrox God title.
He did, but what does the source material say about his consistency leading up to that final peak?
Right.
The sources are very clear. Kingan's regular season performance had been inconsistent. The FMVP was based on a brief, explosive peak moment in the most crucial series of the year, and that distinction is vital when you're assessing his market value.
And this is where the player agency truly dictated the outcome for the whole championship roster, which was that ultimate Cinderella story team.
Exactly. Kingan and his mid laner, Zika, shared the same agency, which allowed for a coordinated negotiation. And DRX knew immediately they couldn't afford to keep the entire winning roster at the now inflated market rate. It's the classic FMVP curse scenario.
So the agency went to work.
Zika's agency encouraged him to immediately test the free agent market for maximum leverage, pushing Zika to leave DRX.
And Kingan followed that domino effect, using his FMVP title as his biggest bargaining chip.
Exactly. Kingan, being under the same aggressive agency, was heavily marketed based entirely on his World Championship experience and that FMVP title. Hanwha Life Esports, HLE, was in the market for high-profile signings. They were looking to build a super team.
And they were more interested in Zika initially, right?
They were. They were initially more interested in the younger, more consistent Zika, but they ultimately signed Kingan instead. They were swayed by the FMVP status and the marketing push from the agency.
So his high market value was based purely on the trophy and the agency spin, not on sustained, consistent performance across a whole season.
The outcome proved it. Kingan failed dramatically to recapture his world's form at HLE. He struggled significantly during the 2023 season.
And HLE dropped him after only 1 year.
They did. It confirmed that his market value was based solely on that brief, explosive peak moment. This case just highlights how quickly the FMVP shelf life can expire when the title isn't backed by consistent, durable performance. It was a classic example of an organization buying the hype instead of the history.
Which brings us full circle right back to T1 and the current situation. We have to connect Marin's rejection a decade ago to the recent departures of Zeus and now Gumayuzi. The organizational philosophy, despite all the turbulence and high salaries across the league, it remains absolutely unchanged.
T1 is the most consistent variable in this entire FMVP narrative. They just don't react to market trends. They stick to their internal financial rules.
So let's start with Zeus in 2023.
Okay. He secured the top lane FMVP in the 2023 Worlds victory, and immediately LPL teams were submitting high aggressive bids for him.
But T1 tried the exact same tactic they used way back in 2015 against Marin financial maneuvering and suppressing the price.
The exact same playbook. T1, aiming to save money and preserve their cap space, reportedly tried to suppress the price during negotiations with Zeus and his agency. They used the corporate narrative, citing the financial deterioration of the broader esports market.
That's such a classic corporate negotiation strategy. Use a broader market downturn or institutional stability as leverage against the individual talent, regardless of how great that talent is.
And Zeus's agency, having learned from cases like Scout and Kingan, was ready for it. They understood his true market value post-FMVP and pushed hard for free agency to maximize his benefits.
And they wanted more than just money.
Crucially, yes. They weren't just demanding salary. They demanded flexibility in salary structure, contract length, and potentially clauses that would allow them to maximize future earnings. These were terms T1 was historically and characteristically unwilling to meet.
Because T1 values organizational stability and cap space over every individual demand.
Save for the one exception.
The result was inevitable then. It mirrored Marin's departure almost perfectly.
Zeus left. He chose the maximal payday and the flexibility over staying with the winning team structure. But here is the critical organizational takeaway that reinforces T1's confidence in their system.
Go on.
T1 successfully replaced him with Doran and still won the next World Championship, the 2024 title. T1 successfully minimized the organizational impact of his departure, reinforcing their own idea that they can afford to lose anyone who isn't Faker.
Which leads us to the most recent, and I think for fans, the most emotionally shocking departure. Gumayuzi in 2024. Guma felt different. He was T1's last Orthodox trainee. He provided critical stability for the bot lane during T1's crisis years.
He's a multi-champion, clutch performer.
His departure feels like a deeper cut to the T1 legacy.
It is shocking because Guma represented the future of T1 training and continuity. He helped T1 complete that historic Triple Crown, and he secured the FMVP. Yet, despite 3 titles and the latest FMVP, T1 let him walk away.
It just signals that they value financial structure and institutional philosophy over the retention of their star AD carry.
It confirms the long-standing organizational philosophy once and for all with zero ambiguity.
Say it again.
It confirms that ironclad rule, the defining feature of the T1 organization. Only Faker is a non-tradable essential asset, whether it was Marine years ago, Zeus last year, or Gumayuzi today. Despite their FMVP titles, their deep contributions, their championship performances, they were never considered irreplaceable.
Or worth fundamentally upsetting the institutional salary structure for.
Never. It's remarkable consistency in a decade of chaotic market flux. T1 believes its system, its brand, and the central figure of Faker are enough to attract and develop new, cheaper talent year after year.
And the future question now is the same as it was after Maren and Zeus left.
It is. T1 will move forward with new talent, trusting their system and the presence of their core figure. But in doing so, they've added Guma to the list of highly motivated competitors, FMVPs, who will now seek to challenge his former team with every tool they have. T1 is essentially cultivating their own highest-level rivals by letting these stars walk for financial control.
This entire deep dive has just laid bare the financial tension that underpins every single victory celebration.
So let's synthesize the recurring themes that define this FMVP curse, these invisible forces that break up championship teams.
Let's do it.
First, and most obviously, the FMVP title itself often marks the moment the player's market value hits its absolute peak. This triggers the beginning of the player's highest contract demands, which immediately places the clubs under intense financial duress.
Duress, which, as we've seen with T1 and Samsung, they often cannot or simply will not handle.
Secondly, we've seen that clubs consistently prioritize managing their salary cap. They're learning from the catastrophic Ning and JKL lesson at IG, or they strictly follow unwavering organizational philosophies, like the iron fist of the T1 model.
And these institutional rules often trump the sentiment of keeping a winning roster intact. It proves that stability is valued over individual star power.
Third, a significant achievement doesn't guarantee security. The timing of the contract is absolutely everything. Low-cost, 3-year contracts, like Tien's, can be massively beneficial for the organization. You get 3 years of high performance for a bargain.
Conversely, high-cost, underperforming long-term contracts like Ning's or Kingan's are financially devastating and can destabilize an entire dynasty.
And finally, the role of player agencies has evolved into an increasingly aggressive and decisive force. They are the key drivers in maximizing player leverage. They often demand flexibility and push for free agency, as we saw in the complex legal negotiations involving Scout, Keyman, and Zeus.
The club might have the checkbook, but the agency often controls the timing and the narrative surrounding that money.
This whole story is about the intersection of peak athletic performance and cold, hard business. The moment the spotlight is brightest, you can bet the accountants are already sharpening their pencils.
So what does this all mean for the future? We have just witnessed T1 make the ultimate gamble once again by letting Gumayusi walk, betting that their system is stronger than any single star player.
And the source material leaves us with this lingering question that unites all these departed FMVPs. Will Gumayusi use his new platform and his ambition to make T1 regret their choice? Or has T1 once again proven that their system and the enduring presence of Faker can always find replacements and maintain dominance regardless of the individual talent they lose?
And for you, the listener, consider the invisible labor, the negotiations, the financial stress, the corporate deception, and the massive legal risks that sit beneath every single trophy presentation. When we celebrate peak performance, what hidden costs are actually being paid for that glory?
That's something for you to mull over or explore on your own until our next deep dive.